My name is Lori Lindley. I'm the Dean of the College of Humanities, Education, and Social Sciences, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to the first speaker for our speaker series. Our speaker series this year is titled Racial Justice Be the Change, and throughout the year we'll be hosting national speakers, panels, and arts events centered around the theme of racial justice and also highlighting opportunities for action. So thank you for being with us for this first event. Our other events will be publicized through Gannon email and marketing, through local media, and also through the Alumni Association. So watch for those events. Our speaker tonight is a longtime leader in the Erie community and at Gannon University. He's been a faculty member at Gannon for over 20 years and is the director of the social work, mortuary science, and gerontology programs at Gannon. He's a powerful mentor for students and won the Student Club Advisor of the Year award last year. In the Erie community, he is a consultant for the Strengthening Police and Community Partnership and conducts diversity training with the Erie Police Department and with the Erie Psychological Consortium. He organized the Clergy Ride-Along program for the Erie Police Department and serves on numerous local and state boards and committees. So his impact on the Erie community and the Gannon community cannot be overstated. This summer, he published a report through the Jefferson Society titled Pain-Filled Polarized America, Reflections, Recommendations on Racism in the U.S. and Erie. This report situates Erie within a larger historical and cultural context of the United States and provides specific recommendations for improvement with regard to racial justice. This report has had a significant impact and has been featured in Real Clear Public Affairs PA and on GoErie.com. His discussion with Ben Spigen provides insightful commentary and recommendations on racial justice action locally and nationally and is available to be viewed on YouTube. We are honored to have the scholar and leader kick off our speaker series this year. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Parris Baker.
Very cool. All right, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. What a way to start. So thank you for being here. I thought it would be a room full of people and a whole bunch of folks watching on Zoom. But my faith tradition always says the people who need to be here are here. I just believe things like that. So smaller audience to do more intimate things. Anyway, I thank you for coming. And if you allow me, there's a couple of things I want to do before we actually get into the presentation. This time for me is, and you'll hear my voice, I mean, this is a really important time in my life in the evolution of where we're going with racial issues. Beginning around 1963 with the March on Washington, I've been captivated by people who can push this issue along. In the last 16 years, I told my daughter, we were watching the Democratic National Convention, and I said, in your lifetime, things that I thought I would never see have happened in your lifetime. We've had a Black president, we have a female vice president, African American. I thought I would never see that. It's an incredible time, and I'm just so thankful for really being in a position to influence a couple of things. And so really grateful for that. And before I begin, I'm always mindful to think of who came before me. And so because I want to honor the women, given the 100-year anniversary of the suffrage movement, there's some powerful women in my life. And so to speak their name to me honors them. So for example, Ella Baker, a name that most people don't know, not related to me. But I noticed, I started reading her stuff, that the way I think and how I talk mimics what she said. I've never read her stuff, but I actually quote her. Just interesting how her work has come out of me. Rosa Parks. I don't want to miss anyone, so I wrote them down. One of my favorites, Ida B. Wells. The strength that she that she carried in the midst of racism to publish about lynching in America, recognizing that she could be lynched at any moment. Incredible strength. Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Stanton, Mary Church Terrell, and then closer to home, Mildred Horton. There's an award at this institution named after her. She was a mentor of mine at age 16 to about 25. And a lot of what you're going to hear, I think, is connected to her. Bonita Booker, who was an employee here for about 20 years, 30 years, something like that. Incredible impact. My grandmother, Shirley Baker, or Shirley Mae Brown Baker. You'll hear a little bit of her story because I can hear her voice right now. And of course, my mother, my wife, and my daughter are all important. So I just want to honor them because what you're going to hear, a lot of what you're going to hear has either direct or indirect connections to those women, okay? So what are we going to do tonight? Okay, what are we going to do? One of the first things I like to talk about when we're talking about race is Black Lives Matter, and for folks who immediately say all lives matter, I say, you're right. And so there are kind of cool ways to talk about like places where people live, strawberry reservations, brown barrios, yellow cantons, vanilla suburbs. But today we're going to talk about chocolate cities. They're all important, okay? But there's something connected to America that is systemically connected to African Americans. And so part of the presentation is just to walk you through that. It is not my goal to try to change what you believe, how you feel. That is not my goal. My goal is to show you that there is an institutional connection between a lot of things that happened in 1619 that got us to 2020. And these things are not accidental, okay? Again, you have the information, kind of use it the way you feel best. An important moment in this evolution, and this is the cover that's on the Jefferson article that you referenced. Something special happened on that day, something special. It was a silent march. You can see there, the street is filled. We planned on 500 people. We had 2,500 people show up. It just blew us away. But in that moment, something for me spiritually happened. When I was walking, I started hearing old Negro spirituals as I'm walking. We shall overcome. It just started coming out of me. Of course, my waterhead self, I got a little teary because all that stuff I've heard my grandmother say in all my family, specifically today, my grandmother, about things are going to change, things are going to get better, things are going to change, things are going to get better. Okay, maybe they will, maybe they will. But on this day, while we were walking, I said, I think it's happening. I think as we're moving forward, something is changing. When we got to Perry Square, if anyone was there, you heard Bishop Persico come to the mic. And I knew it was special then when we had bishop after pastor of white congregations come to the podium and say, we are repenting. That was not scripted. We had no idea that what was going to be said, but I said, that's a moment. That's what we need to hear. And I've never heard that before. And so again, something special is happening. And then if you were, a couple of weeks ago, we had a prayer service outside of the Episcopal Church here on a Friday evening. And once again, it happened. I was blown away. I was overwhelmed, getting teary again, because Bishop Rowe pointed to the church and he said, I want to repent, but I want to be clear about it. These are my words. I want to be clear about what I'm repenting for. This church represents white privilege. And there was a time in Africa where the Episcopal Church built churches, but underneath had slaves that weren't allowed to come up. And then there were a couple people in the audience that said, and that is connected to Erie, because when I attended this church or other churches like this, I had to go in the back door and sit in the back or sit in the basement. That far away, I was like, wow, that's what we're changing. That's the kind of stuff that we're changing. And so I'm really happy to be part of that. I'm not going to go through all this, but this is one of the songs. If you're familiar with the Lift Every Voice Within Black Negro, National Black Negro Anthem, excuse me, I'm trying to talk too fast. There are a couple lines in here. Here we go. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the days when hope unborn had died, yet with a steady beat, have not our weary feet. And that made sense when I was walking. I began to understand what these marches were for. Because at one point I was not a big marcher. Like, why are we protesting? Why are we marching? What's the value of that? We need to do something, we need to change something. But in that moment, I began to understand why those marches, why that protest, that method of protesting was so important. Anyway, thematically, that song kind of came alive for me. A line from the article, America's Weeping. And how I came up with that, it's the first line in the article, is because before I started writing, I was in my office and I was weeping. And I said, America's got to feel like me. Because there were certain things like, George Floyd backwards that I just started thinking about. It was one after another. And I was just engulfed in pain. And I said, America, I believe, is feeling the same way I am. So we're weeping, but I thought, as I started processing, that we might be weeping for different reasons. Okay, so I started to process that. Why are we weeping? And so what I want to accomplish today, I put here in these 3 points. I want you to join me like AAA, the American Automobile Association. I want you to think about this presentation like we think about AAA. Well, what is AAA? Since we have a small audience, I can talk to Olivia. I told you I was going to get you. What do you know about AAA?
You call them when you need help.
Absolutely. And there's so many things about what we're trying to do that so many people don't know what to do, that we need to talk to each other. We need to really, really engage in some real critical conversations, because the truth of the matter is most of us have a little knowledge, but we're trying to figure it out while we're moving forward, okay? So I have AAA and I want you to join me. The first one is, and this is important to me, that I'm not asking you to apologize for history. Because I hear that all the time, like, it's history, it has nothing to do with me. Don't apologize for it, acknowledge it. That's so important. And I learned part of that, saw the power of that in those two, the silent march and the prayer vigil that we had, that we need to acknowledge it. Some folks wanted to repent, but history is history. It is what it is. So we just need to acknowledge it. And at the end of this presentation, I hope that you can understand why that acknowledgement is so important, because I'm going to go through history fairly quickly, leapfrogging over a couple of things. But you'll begin to see a theme emerge, okay? The second A is, if you need to apologize, don't apologize for the history. Apologize for any time that you had to speak to this issue that you may have withdrawn from it, that you may have avoided it, that you may have been complicit in it. There you might need to apologize, not for the history, but why is it that you don't want to talk about it? And I, again, put the theme of our series, be the change. And how do you do that? People ask me all the time, what should I do? Talk to people you don't know. That's how I know Olivia and Emily. It is not that hard to do. Talk to people who are different and keep talking to them. Something special happens when you just start the conversation. There are other things that we need to do, but let's start small. Just start these important conversations. And then thirdly, actively become agents of hope, not agents of change. What I've discovered in the African-American community is that in the 16503 zip code, which I have lived the bulk of my life, there's a diminishing level of hope. And you'll understand why when I show you the data. And people wake up with no sense that things are going to be different. So before we ask them to change, we got to give them motivation to change. And that is, we got to provide hope that things will be different. So I'm asking you to become agents of change, activists for institutional change, and advocates with or excuse me, for or with those who may have muted voices. Everyone has a voice. Some people don't recognize they can use it. So you may have to help them use it. You can advocate, you can speak for them, and then have them join you, or you can help them talk. But we need every voice to be talking about what's going on in their community, what's going on in their family, what's going on in their life, okay? So engage in the difficult conversations. And we're going to do some of that today. Is that okay? All right. Yeah. Let's start with this thing. This is a Jenga game. Question to you, how do you win this game? Not how do you play it, how do you win? What's the nature of the game? And since it's just us, shout out an answer. How do you win? Who has played Jenga? Almost everyone. How do you win?
Last man standing.
Last
man standing.
Last man standing. Not quite. But you think about the rules. It says, last man standing, it's the person who I move, it doesn't fall. You move, it falls down. I win because of your failure. That's how I win. And that's policy, that's institutional. And if we want that game to change, we can't change how we play it. We have to change the rules of the game. That's the focus of this institutional design. What are the rules of the game? And so I'm not saying don't do the things person to person. They help us feel good, they provide hope. But real change will happen when we change policy. And again, I'm going to point to some of the policies to suggest here is where we can make a difference, okay? This is some data about the 16503 zip code in Erie. Ironically, 1/3 of the 16503 zip code is African American. Almost the same amount of African Americans for the total population of African Americans in Erie. So you have 1/3 of the population living in one zip code. Let's see, the poverty level, the most recent statistics that I can find is 46% of the people who live in that zip code are at or below the poverty level, which is $25,099. Crazy. What I don't have here is I went back to look at some data. 40 years ago, it was 40%. And it remained that way over 40 years. So people who have grown up in the 16503 zip code have grown up in poverty all of their life. Okay. I put the 16506 zip code to show you the disparity, because that's the most affluent zip code in Erie. So the amount of African Americans that live there is 1%, and the median income is $63,376. Look at the disparity. That's not to blame anyone. Let's look at the picture and see what are we dealing with. Okay. 2017, Erie, based on some of those statistics. Again, there's all kind of methodological problems that people have talked about. I get that. We still had the most dubious distinction of being the poor or the worst city in America for African Americans to live. How did that happen? Well, what I'm going to present part of today is how do you change the community? Well, we know that intergenerational wealth is connected to home ownership. So I said, let's look at home ownership, because home ownership is connected to so many other variables in communities. So let's take a look at that. I'll come back to that in a minute. Here we go. In this zip code, we have almost 7,000 housing units. Only 30% of the people who live there own their own home. Slow down. So if we're talking about changing the community, we'd have to think, how do we raise home ownership for the people who live there? Because 55% of the folks who rent, and most of their income somewhere between a third to upwards of 50% of their income is used for rent alone. So if you do the math, you have $8,785 at 35%, which leaves for the remainder of the year $16,314 for everything else. Wow. Homes are about 50K or less. The average is about 34K. And so we have a really depressed community, economically struggling community, which means school systems are struggling. Okay. Let's see if I have that here. Oh, yeah, here we go. That's in the bottom. Erie School District at that particular time, 2016-17, ranked 485th out of 500 school districts. We were struggling, and the kids who lived in that zip code were struggling even more. 90% of them, depending on what school, upwards of 95% of the students. For example, McKinley, the one that I attended, and is real close to the church that I attend and pastor, 95% of all the students qualify for a free or reduced lunch. That's amazing. Here is part of the recommendations I made to the mayor's office in the report. The comprehensive plan that was developed says that the East Bayfront zone is one of the worst in Erie. But it also said, do not use a deficit model to fix it. That troubled me. The plan says the area that I pointed to, the 16506 area code, let's put some of our resources in that area. And the message that I heard was, tell 16503 to wait for help. And I was really troubled with that. If you look at that report, you will see Parris Baker is the first name alphabetically. So, and in those conversations, I said, you want me to go back and tell the members of that community to wait when I told you 1960 forward, folks have been living in poverty. Wait for what? How long? Wait again? I was really troubled by that. That made me think of Martin Luther King, who said from a Birmingham jail, his letter to, in response to 8 clergy, we can't wait. And the message, if you, again, I won't read all this, but when you talk to African Americans about waiting, that means never, it's not gonna happen. And I related to what he was saying. We've been telling folks to wait for a long time. When is it going to happen? And then it's a little more of, again, I would challenge you to read the entire letter. But here he said, we've been waiting for more than 340 years at that particular time for America to honor the promises that it has made to its citizens of color. When is it going to happen? Okay. So here is now the institutional piece I want to talk to you about, starting with the Declaration of Independence. Okay, let's start there. Incredible words, incredible. We hold these truths to be self-evident. King used this in his 1963 I Have a Dream speech. The question was, did we mean those words at that particular time? Powerful words. Did we mean that? At the time that that was passed, there was slavery in all 13 colonies at the very time. So there was a disconnect from the evolution of how we thought about all men are created equal.
Because they were thinking about all men as in all white men.
We're definitely gonna talk back. I like that. You surprised me there for a moment. Yes.
I
didn't expect that, but we can talk.
Okay, sorry.
Yes. And we're going to get to a lot of that as I go through, kind of leapfrog through this. I really try to leave some time at the back end so we can talk to each other. So this is not a history class. I'm going to make some assumptions about it. For example, 1776 to 1861, I made a huge leap, but I wanted to put these close to each other so that we can begin to see what we were saying at the beginning of the foundation of America when we had the Civil War. The first vice president of the Confederate States said, our government is founded on exactly the opposite ideas. He's talking about the Declaration of Independence. Its foundations are laid, its cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man. Interesting, when you juxtapose them. We're created equal? No, we're not. So we're going to fight over that. That's what the Civil War was about, okay? So as we move forward, part of what was the connection, the conception of Black folks in America at that particular time. The role of Christianity cannot be underscored. Now, I am an ordained minister of the gospel, so I am not beating up Christianity, okay? But the role of Christianity in cementing racism is huge, absolutely huge. Who could argue against this was ordained by God? Your position, your status in life was ordained by God. And here's one of the scriptures that was used repeatedly to reinforce that point. Let every soul be subject unto the higher power, for there is no power but God. The powers that be are ordained by God. Whosoever therefore resists the power, resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. Now, would you fight against that if you knew or felt that somehow if I raised up and rebelled that I would go to hell? Probably not. You think about that. If you don't teach folks how to read the Bible, you're reading it for them, and then you're interpreting for them. How you could end up thinking it must be our lot in life to be slaves, to be submitted, to be subordinates, to be subjected, blah, 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 blah. Again, how did that happen? I believe in the larger picture, not everyone believed that. In fact, I think the majority did not. But here is why I need you to listen closely. Because along the way, you got to ask yourself, if it was happening, who let it happen? Because everyone did not believe that way. The folks in power who had an economic stake in it being that way clearly said, this is the way I want it to be. I'm going to teach it that way. I'm going to put it in our other institutions. I get that. But if the bulk of the folks, over 50% of the folks said, I really don't agree with that ideology, then how did it happen? And sometimes I say that in the 21st century, 2020. What is going on that we may not be speaking up enough about to make the changes, okay? 1957, if you're not familiar with Dred Scott, again, another, I think, pivotal moment in how we thought about African Americans. Dred Scott was a slave in one state, tried to get his freedom in another state. Constitution said, you are a slave and you will be a slave. And the opinion that was written by Justice Taney said, African Americans committed to writing could never become American citizens. Again, from the Constitution, the highest court in the land has made a statement. African Americans cannot, will not be citizens of the United States. Okay. Moving forward, 1965, after the Civil War, 13th Amendment, and I would encourage you to watch the movie 13th. Incredible documentary. You should watch that. It's rich in the information that you can glean from. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except, and I can't read behind there, punishment for a crime whereof the party shall something be duly convicted. You can't see it either, okay? The highlighted piece, which is important in that 13th Amendment, is except punishable by crime. Because right after the 13th Amendment and slavery was abolished, crime in terms of how white America thought about criminal activity began to change. Institution of Jim Crow laws. If you're familiar with that, you could be arrested for anything because what was the motivation? Since we can't enslave you, we'll incarcerate you. And so folks who were free were not free. loitering, vagrants. Honest to goodness, check me out. I didn't put it in here. There is a clause, Walter, that said black and white people cannot play chess together. Cannot play chess together. Someone institutionalized that. You cannot play checkers or chess, board games. What? So you had Jim Crow laws, you had black codes, and the violation was incarceration or death. And that became part of the American fabric. When I say that, it was initially instituted and there was a lot of struggle because people were resistant to that. But over time, it became normalized. And here's where some of the pictures might get a little graphic. The reason I'm showing you the pictures is not for the sensationalism. I want you to see that it became so normalized. These are postcards that I'm showing you. These are not pictures. These are postcards that were mailed in the US Postal Service, where people took pictures of lynchings and then wrote whatever they wrote to their family members and mailed them. That's incredible to me. If you read the caption here, postcards of spectators dressed in their Sunday best to watch lynchings. It became so normalized. How do we think about black people? Again, my point, so I can keep reminding you, is not to get you to believe a particular way, to show you why someone would say, 400 years later, Black Lives Matter. Because in the beginning, did they ever? And you can see constitutionally, maybe not. In my world, absolutely not. Okay. Now we're getting to the 16503 zip code. In America, there was an institution called the Realtor Code, a code of ethics from 1924 to 1950. If you read carefully, it absolutely told real estate agents, here's what you will do in terms of selling homes, and here's what you won't do. And violation of that would mean that you would lose your realtor's license. So we have communities. This is for this group, this is for this group, and black people cannot be in either one. This process was called redlining, where you go to a map and you literally, the real estate agents in this area, you will not sell homes or rent homes to African Americans or Negroes or black folks, okay? Look at the language. Again, this is all documented stuff. No property shall at any time be sold, conveyed, rented, leased, in whole or in part to any person or persons not of the white or Caucasian race. Pretty clear. And this is how this was promoted throughout America. We want white tenants in our white community. When, I'll say this in a second. 1996, you had Plessy versus Ferguson, and in that, you had the separate but equal doctrine. That's where it came from, okay? Constitutionally saying that you can have separate facilities that at least theoretically are equal. I went to the Birmingham Civil Rights Museum. I think it's in Alabama. I can't remember if it's Birmingham or Montgomery, but it's in Alabama. And I went to, they have like the literal fountains, and I stood at them. There was nothing equal about those fountains. I mean, I was amazed that anyone would drink from the one that said for color. I couldn't even imagine being alive at that time where I had to drink water from that fountain. But again, juxtaposed, when you saw them together, you go, wow, they're so different. How could someone say they're equal? Okay. When African Americans decided to move and develop their own communities, again, think about this as the Jim Crow era. And there was a lot of discussion about this recently when Trump wanted to have a rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And part of that is because of this moment right here. What happened was this community developed, it was called Black Wall Street because it became self-sufficient. African Americans had their own banks, their own laundry, their own everything, their own service for anything, any need that they had. They developed it in this community, said we can become self-sufficient. White community around them said, you guys are making too much, you're doing too well. And what set the interaction, the conflict, was there was a report that a white man was assaulting, a black man was assaulting a white woman. And we're gonna get you, and we're gonna lynch you. Black folks and the community said, no, you're not, we're gonna protect him. And then it was an all out riot. In this particular conflict, which to me is amazing, folks who owned airplanes gassed up their planes and bombed the city. That's amazing. That happened in America. And again, it's like overwhelming to think about it, but yes, that's part of the history when it comes to the issue of race in America. This happened again in Rosewood, Florida. Same idea. Rosewood was self-sufficient community. Same idea in terms of the conflict. It was an accusation of a black man against a white woman. We had the town burned down. Did you know that Central Park was once a community for African Americans in New York? I found that to be amazing. It was called the Central City. It became Central Park later. All right, moving forward. 1954, we had the Separate but Equal Act. Now we have the 14th Amendment, the Board of Education Topeka in 1954, which overruled that, said it was unconstitutional to have separate but equal. 3 years later, that ruling was tested in the Little Rock 9. And so on September 4th, there were 9 students, think about high school students, so 14 to 17, that were going to go to school with a mob saying, you will not enter the school. Now, in terms of the constitutional right to do that, they had every reason to go. They had every right to go. But the governor of the state said, no, it's not going to happen. The National Guard had to be sent to escort the students into the school. My microphone's not working. What do I do? If we have public schools and they're going to be integrated, then in terms of religious education, folks began developing their own schools, which were primarily all white. So we will have Catholic school or Protestant school or Episcopalian school or whatever. But the idea is we're not going to do integration. We're just not going to do it, okay? And you can see the signs and the kind of the attitude being reflected here. And, I'm almost at the end of the presentation because I didn't want to get bogged down in history, because from that point forward, things began to speed up in America, truly began to speed up. And the reason is because of technology. What we didn't know, we had to wait for history to kind of catch up. Once the television began to broadcast, this is what's going on in America. The sense that it was speeding up because we could get the news, the information much more quickly began to happen in America. We began to see these pictures. And in terms of the civil rights and putting this information forward, this woman is one of my heroes, because she said, this is Emmett Till, who was a resident in Chicago and went to Money, Mississippi in 1955. And the story was that he was flirting with Carol Bryant. We found out later she recanted that and said, I made the story up. Told her husband. So her husband and another white guy went to Emmett's uncle's house, went into the house, took him out of the house, drove him somewhere, killed him. But you can see what they did, the mutilation. They bashed his head in, broke his arm, threw him in the river. His body floated up. She said, I want America to see what happened to my son. And that's why we have these pictures. She said, the world needs to know what's going on. So and this is one of the events that people say was the start of the civil rights movement in the South with Dr. King. Second here is Rosa Parks and the bus boycott. And then we have the bombing in Alabama. 4 African-American girls were killed in that, which leads up to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Incredible legislation, changed a lot of things. But what it didn't change was attitudes. Changed constitutionally, but the attitude in America remained the same. 1968, the Kerner Commission said, we have 2 Americas, one white, one black. And if we don't fix this, it's going to get worse. Well, that was in 1968. This is 2020, and we're still talking about some of the same stuff. This report was right on the money. And again, I'm going to bounce through. 1991, because of technology videos, we had a chance to see conclusively with our eyes Rodney King. And if you're a little older, you guys may not have been born, I don't know. But some of us, we saw this on TV and it was horrifying. And it just kept happening. More video. This one troubles me because he's only 12 in Cleveland. And the report that the 2 officers received was this. It's probably a toy gun. That was said 3 times from the dispatcher to those officers. The car still is in process when the shots were fired. They hadn't even stopped the car. They were shooting out of the car. Orlando Castillo in Minnesota. What people don't know, that's why I put this here. He was stopped 48 times before he was killed. 48 times. Most of them, they just let it go. They stopped him. They couldn't find anything. There was nothing to prosecute or to arrest him for, and they let him go. The 49th time, he was killed in front of his girlfriend and his daughter. We know about Breonna Taylor. She was in her apartment. No knock entry, shot 8 times. And then this gets us to George Floyd, who repeated 16 times, I cannot breathe. And you can see that I skipped over a whole bunch of other folks to get here. What troubles me is the middle picture. I cringe, I hurt physically, my body hurts that you put your knee, but your hand is in your pocket as if it's no big deal. You're so nonchalant about this activity. Again, I go back to, does this remind me of 1691 or 1619 forward? Kind of in a real microcosmic way, a quick snapshot. Is that America? Is that the America I live in? And you have to know when I say this, I always have to say this right here, is I love Erie, Pennsylvania. That's why I stay here. I love Gannon. That's why I stay here. I've been in Gannon since 1974. That's a long time to be with one institution. Crazy folks are here. Some of y'all crazy. I love this place, not necessarily the buildings. Buildings don't do anything. The people who are here, incredible people. And I love America. I wouldn't go anywhere. I wouldn't live anywhere else. But I cannot ignore this, nor plead with America. Pay attention to this. And I don't necessarily mean, I don't want to minimize this, because people can argue this all day. We argue all day about he should have did this, she should have did that, they should have submitted, blah, blah, blah. You can get into those arguments. This presentation is about the systems that need to change. If we change those systems, if we change this game, how we win, we might change outcomes. And what I want to present to you is there's been a number of changes that have happened constitutionally in America, and every single time, there's been a change to move one group forward. There's been an absolute resistance to that change. And I'm committed to say right now, we should understand that, we should talk about it and commit ourselves to not let that happen again. Why do I call it 1619? Because if you know anything about Erie, there was a time when 1/2 to 1/3 to 1/2 of all the African Americans who lived in Erie came from one state, from one city, Laurel, Mississippi. Okay, you could talk to almost any African American here. Where are you from? If not Laurel, Heidelberg, or Jones County or something. So what was going on in Mississippi came through the northern migration route, came to Erie. So we had a lot of African Americans who relocated physically in one place, but had these same attitudes that they had from Mississippi. Interesting thing about Mississippi also is the last state to ratify that 13th Amendment, 1866, was Mississippi. And that only happened 7 years ago, which is amazing to me. It only happened 7 years ago that the 13th Amendment was certified in the state of Mississippi. What I am pleased about is that it was one of the only states to have the Confederate flag. They don't have a flag now. So something institutionally is changing, where people are saying we're gonna make a difference, because we're gonna think about the messages that are, the symbols that are reinforcing some of these attitudes. And so without even having a new flag, let's get rid of the old one and let's start moving forward. Let's rethink this, okay? I think this is the last, yep, this is the last slide. So I want you to think about this and we can start our conversation. Ibram X. Kendi, I love his statement. It's not the first time I heard it, I just like how he worded it. Americans have long been trained to see the deficiencies of people rather than policy. Individual behaviors can shape the success of individuals, but policies determine the success of groups. So we have to think about changing those institutions. So I'm asking you to join AAA, be the change. What am I saying? Acknowledge the history, apologize for complicity if that's what you're doing, and then change. Become active, an activist and an advocate for change. So there you have it. I'm done. Or you can clap if you like. It's a lot. I told Dr. Magnum when I did this, I had a slide full of pictures. And I said, that's going to scare folks because the history is horrible. I had pictures of slave ships where they remanufactured, redesigned slave ships to get more people in those boats. And so they would lay them like one next to each other, 3 rows deep. So if you were on the bottom, folks who were defecating at the top were doing it on you, and you could spend like a week in that condition. So there was disease and death and all that. I said, it's a little too much. That's just Emily said, dang right. It's a little too much. What surprised me, honestly, to the educators, is how little our students know this history. They have just nowhere to plug in, which is another reason why I pulled back on this. Because if it's the first time you've heard it, it could be shocking. Like, wow, that's who we are. Again, I'm not saying, let's beat up on America, but let's understand who we are. Black Lives Matter didn't just happen. It's been an issue. It's been around for over 400 years. And if you were a resident, which is another reason I brought up Mississippi, it is possible generationally that you could have lived in Mississippi and have never been free. It is possible that you would have only experienced 7 years of freedom. Just the way you think about it, because again, that ratification only happened 7 years ago. So you could have been thinking that way, passed on from generation to generation. And trust me, my roots take me back to Mississippi, and I can tell you categorically that people still respond in like fashion to those social mores and how to think about white people. I was taught when I was 8 years old to run from the police, not because not because they're white, it's because the police are dangerous. They are not your friends, okay? And again, there's a whole history that supports, why would you teach? Because I've had folks ask me, why would anyone teach you that? And you kind of get the picture here. It's for survival, okay? It's for survival. So those attitudes and ways of thinking have been transmitted right here to Erie. So we have a lot to do, but I'm so hopeful. I am, because we have a lot of the right people sitting at the tables. We have a lot of the right peoples. I've never heard a mayor, for example, say, my goal is to eliminate racism in Erie. I hit him one time and said, Joe, racism has been around a long time. He said, it's still my goal. He's committed to eliminating racism. We'll see. But anyone who's committed in that fashion to say it publicly, I said, I gotta stand next to you. I'm gonna help you do that. We'll see what happens. And so we have a lot of community members, again, from the clergy to Gannon, our president, the mayor, our county exec, all saying, let's get to the table and let's change this. What can we do? I work with the police department. We have the chief, the Erie County DA and the federal court DA. A lot of folks coming to the table saying, how do we fix this? I think we have a window of opportunity and we should take advantage of it. Where you come in, you may not be at those tables, but I guarantee you someone's going to talk to you about racism. What are you going to say to them when it happens? They're going to ask you, what you learned from this presentation? What are you going to say? Like, you're only one of 3 students here. What are you going to say? What did you learn? You're going to have to respond, and I don't know who's going to see this afterwards. So I'm open for questions if you have any or not. Yes.
It's sort of a 2-part question here, but they're related. What's your take on the relationship between the Erie Police Department and like the people living in 16503? The second part of that is, as a social worker, how do you feel about these ideas about replacing some of the functions of the police with people like social workers to go in there and do, certain respond to certain kinds of calls?
And Chris, you can jump in because Chris has done some incredible work with GIS mapping. And so we know that that's a high crime area. Again, once you understand the statistics, it should not surprise you what's happening in that zip code. Not only crime, the COVID infection rate is highest in that zip code. You have the worst health outcomes. I mean, I could just go on and on and on, all located in that area. Graduation rate, if you go back to the slide, 72% in the 16503 zip code, 96% in 16506. It just jumps off the page. What can we do? So for me, I've heard the plan about changing some things. What I haven't heard in my distress is not the plan to change. They want to make a lot of green space and park kind of situations like that. And I'm okay with that if you tell me, what are you going to do for the people who live there? And that's not in the plan. And so I don't use the cursed G word because it's a curse word, but it's the G word. Everybody know what the G word is? There you go. All right. I'm just not sure, okay? I've never been an advocate for changing the police. The bulk of the police in Erie, I've done right along probably 30, at least 28, and I stopped counting after that. So I'm in the car with officers, and I've seen almost everything, short of someone actually being killed. I've experienced almost everything. And I've said to the African-American community in Erie, these officers are not racist. They're not racist, rather. How do I know that? Is because when you're under a lot of pressure and you're moving, you're not thinking about me and what you got to say. You got to, Dr. Baker's here, we got to do it all right. It's happening way too fast. So over, I think it was probably 6 or 7 years, I think I would have seen or heard it once, but I haven't. Now, in the distribution, good officers, bad officers, in the middle, everyone's working hard. So there are some bad apples, okay, make no mistake about it. But the bulk of them, I think, are committed to the mission, to the the idea of protect and serve. They are overworked, and there are not enough of them, okay? There's 173, there should be 240, so clearly not enough officers. To have them do social work stuff, I think is a mistake, personally, because they're asked to do too many things right now, okay? They have to go into situations where mental health services are needed. The call was there's a crime being committed by someone who's having a mental health issue. So how do they respond to that? They respond to it because their job is to handle the criminal part of it. Okay. I don't know that they're trained, and I don't know that they can't. I don't think they became a cop to also be a mental health specialist or social worker or anything else. But they gotta, Narcan folks and bring them back to life. And I mean, they've done all that kind of stuff. They're asked to do way too many things. And so I think the language is wrong. It's not defund the police or replace them. It's let's reimagine how they work and to bring other folks alongside of them. Okay, that's how I look at that.
We have a topic for the speaker series. It's going to talk about that. I invited an expert who really studied the topic.
Oh, nice, okay.
And we have reactors coming from the Pennsylvania State of Police.
Okay.
And we also have reactors from the crime victim centers who are going to react to this presentation. It's just talking about the topic of defunding the police and more funding for the social work. But in my experience of working with the social work agency and the Erie Police Department, actually one of my colleagues went to my office and asked me about the topic. There's no way that I can, marginalize the police department. I work with them a lot. I know them.
Yeah.
I have a close relationship with the chief of police and data analyst, and at the same time, I have a really close relationship with the social work. But every time I teach the crime mapping, I have this exercise that I call crime graph. Why crime exists, poverty, lack of education, so what we do to the person who committed crime, we put them, incarcerate them, we punish them. So what do you think will happen? Do you think somebody will replace him and do the same thing in that situation? And every student is going to say yes. So we need to, that's the beauty of GIS, because we don't only talk about the individual who commit crime, we also talk about the space, the environment, the community that produce the social problem that we transform. And that's where I'm coming from, why I'm continuously supporting all the social agencies and government agencies in our city and within the world for several years. And we don't want to bring everyone that won't find them, stage and understand the issue.
I think it would be a great mistake if we reduce the number of officers. It just would be bad. Let me share a couple of things with you. I'll get you in a second. I got you. About personal, transparent moment. I thought about it for a second. I said, I think it's probably good that you hear this. Growing up in 16503, the area code, when I was younger, I used to ask the question to my father and my uncles. If you know my family, I got a long history of athletes. Charlie Baker was a track star, and my uncle Art was a national wrestler, and he ran in the same backfield with Jim Brown. That tells you the level. But beyond them, because I thought they were exceptional, so they were the exception to the rule, I would ask the question repeatedly, why do why do white people always win? Do you see the orientation? Living in that, waking up every day going to the school and we're still behind, and going to other schools, traveling, playing ball, football, basketball, and their facilities are way better than us, and they're dressed, they look so much better than us, and then they would talk about us. Like, when are we gonna win? I grew up until like 11 or 12, asking that question, which is why I fell in love with folks like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. Somebody who would stand up to white folks and say, this is the way it is. For me, that was empowering, because There was no one in my community that looked that way, sound that way. I thought we were all afraid of changing anything. And I just filled with wonderment, asking the question, what is it about us that we can't win? So I just want you to get that kind of thinking, if you grew up in that zip code, how that might, as part of your human development, be part of who you are.
So you made two comments, change the rules of the game and changing the policy. So I'm thinking when you said like how have we, looked at racism, and I grew up in a very poor community, all white. I don't think I'd ever even met anybody who wasn't white, but we didn't know we were poor. We didn't know we were white. We were just, this is what we knew. And then when I became an adult and I moved to the big city of Erie, I moved over to Warfel Avenue because I found a house that was $39,000 and I bought this house and was so proud of it. Well, I lived in a very poor community again at that time, but it was eye-opening because it was a different kind of poor. And it was, for once I was the minority, but I felt the same way. I didn't really know that I was poor or the minority, and you just live.
Yeah.
So what I'm getting at is when you have all these rural communities that aren't teaching about racism, and they don't have anything to relate to until you're living it as an adult, I think that has a lot of the problem, with adults watching the news because they've never been exposed to these different things until it's too late. So maybe the education at a younger age in the rural areas too is really a part of the problem.
Part of that whole discourse that you shared is, my surprise is how little folks know about history. And my question is, who made a decision to decide what is in history books and what isn't? Again, to me, that's institutional. Books come and we use them. But why are Native American stories eliminated? Okay, I'm not sure why. Or, and take your pick of the history of America. Why are these stories? Why don't we know that? And those are decisions that people make, okay, as to what's what. You have your hand up?
Scratching my forehead.
Okay, well, you can do that. In my class, if you scratch your head, I say your hand was up. It was you psychologically saying, call me, because your hand went up. And no one moves. So I'll get you.
It's close enough.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not scratching my head.
I'll get to you in a second. I want to go back to that comment. We didn't know poverty until we went to middle school, because all of us attended McKinley. So it was the same neighborhood kids, and we were all poor. It was no big deal. When I went to Wilson, we had kids coming from all over places. People said, oh, look at your sneakers. You're poor. I went, what does that mean? Like, yeah, because we had hand-me-downs. If you show you how poor we were, hand-me-down sneakers. Like, kids throw sneakers away. Oh, they're a little dusty. Throw them away, get some more. We were sharing sneakers. And I can remember feeling the shame of that moment. Like, oh, we're poor. I don't get new stuff. It was one of those moments. Like, what is that like? That is crazy.
Dr. Baker,
Yes.
this is not going to be Grace's question, it's just something I'd like your response to.
Okay.
I'm going to take it down to Gannon, because I love Gannon. Like, you said it,
Yeah.
I'll say it, I love Gannon. What can we do? It hurts me to see those images, because I know that other people are seeing those images, and it does not hurt me as much as it hurts the people living it, and that kills me a little bit. We're talking about systemic trauma, right? Like, this is like generational systemic trauma we're looking at. And that's like a mental health thing, that we have to have a specialized response for this specialized problem.
Right.
We cannot rely on the corrupt institutions to resolve this pain, I think. We of course need we can't live in a world without institutions, but we have to think outside the box here. Personally, growing up in the mental health world, I've seen racism within treatment centers, within are inpatient hospitals, and it exists there too.
Right.
I've seen young Black kids targeted as being threatening and being restrained for things that a white kid would never get restrained for.
Right.
It is integrated, and we need diverse peer support on campus, if I'm being blunt. We gotta be preventative, we gotta be proactive, because our kids, our like students are struggling. I'm hearing it from the Black Student Union, and I'm hearing it from my friends, and it's bothering me. You keep saying be the change, and I think that like, this is the time, you know?
Yeah.
And I just wanna know what you gotta say, because I don't know what your thoughts on approaching this trauma are from a social work perspective.
Ho, 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 we got a bag of stuff.
Sorry, that was a lot, but
Yeah.
my heart says it.
I've shared this with you and a few others. Having been around Gannon since 1974, I can tell you part of the history of Gannon was the Waldron Center used to be the Rook. It was 2 buildings and had a little quadrangle. And during that time, I was attending Upward Bound. We would run, if you could believe this is way before your time, where we had a box TV, only a few channels, and we would run at 6 o'clock to watch the news. There would be 60 students around the television. And then we would have mentors after the news went off. Tell me what you heard. Because we were all like conscious about, we're here to make change. We can make a difference. And you have to kind of have to grow that attitude, that culture, that we are not here just to get a degree, but we really do have a responsibility to make change in some of these institutions. Because that's what we're going to go out and go somewhere. We're going to be plugged into an institution somewhere. And we're probably going to bump into it somewhere. So for me, the universities have always been a practice ground. Sharpen your skills here. Take some risk here. This is probably the best place to do it. The penalty is not that great. Use the university, use the faculty, use the mentors, use each other. How's it going? Learn how to take a risk and be courageous in that moment, not worrying about falling down. This is a safe place to do that and try it. So I think the university, and I believe Gannon is doing that, by the way. You know, I don't sit with the powers that be, so I don't make the decisions. But I think we have made a concerted effort to try to, I mean, the fact that we're doing this is evidence of that. But I would love to see the day when we have student-led conversations like the one I talked about, where we were just, we can change it. I mean, we believe that. We can change the world. That was one of our mottos. We can change the world. We can do anything. 40 years later, you know what I'm struggling with? Hope for myself. Been doing this a long time. And not trying to pour water on students to say, you know, that's really hard work. You may not see it happen in your lifetime or whatever. And again, I go back to, my daughter doesn't have that. She has seen history happen. She has seen it happen. But that didn't happen unless you have Fannie Lou Hamer, Martin Luther King, people hitting it and, you know, moving it. And that's how I think about your question in a short version, okay? Institutions are hard to change, but institutions are always real people behind the policies. To me, legislation is, or excuse me, the Constitution is legislative beliefs. I write something because this is what I believe, and we vote on it, and if enough people vote, what I believe is now legislated. Legislative beliefs, well, you can change those, okay? Whether it's in your voting behavior or who you elect or what have you, you can change those things. We just got to get people to believe in it enough to want to work at it. And can I just be absolutely transparent here? This is not a Black problem. It just isn't. And you've heard me say that. That's why I like to go to meetings but not say anything. Because when I start talking, people say, well, what do you think? And I go, it's not just my problem. It's not just my issue. I want you to think about this. Again, I was talking to a group of white men. And we were talking about the question of how does slavery affect them? And I said, I want you to imagine being in the rural South and you're being taught right, Christian community and your family and the community that you lived in, how to treat Black people. You have not seen any Black people yet. You're going to be socialized how to think about, I'm 5 years old, but I know that I have authority over 30-year-old Black men. You have to be taught that. You understand? That's amazing, but that's part of the history. You will never let an African-American male talk to you, look at a woman in a particular way. All that stuff is part of the culture that you were taught. But what did you think you taught your children? Blah, 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 blah. Someone has to stop that, okay? Unfortunately, we're doing a good job in some circles in doing that. But the reason I say America is weeping is because I still believe we have two Americas. Actually, to be honest, we have a fragmented America. Because I got to bring in my Native Americans in all these conversations, because part of me is Native American. We just do not talk enough about first persons in this nation. And again, if you've ever been to a real reservation, not the casinos, the real reservations, you can see nothing good is happening there. So suicide is high, it makes sense. Substance abuse is high, it makes sense when you go and look at what's going on there. They wake up every day, and like, is it gonna get better? I don't know, but I'm trying to figure it out. And they're lost in the sauce. They don't get enough discussion. As well as we're talking about Black Lives Matter, it could be very easily, we could say, Red Lives Matter, okay? They are not being shot, but guess what? They wake up every day in oppressive conditions that we have just forgotten. If you look at their history, I could have had a whole slide just look how we treated, Native Americans. It would have been just as powerful. For those who are from, a couple of questions for you, if you don't mind. Can I ask a couple of questions of you? Think about a large city like Chicago, LA, New York, Cleveland, you take your pick, a large metropolitan city, and answer this question for me. Which side of the city is affluent? Which side is poor? East side or west side?
Always the east.
Hmm?
Oh,
Which is which?
Chicago is south, right?
North.
By the river.
Well, thank you. We're going to get to that in a second. What's that? In most cities, if you're going east to west, east side is poor, west side is affluent. In almost every metropolitan city, you think about it.
the same thing in Erie.
Exactly, and that's my point. If you go to Cleveland, it's the same way. You got the eastern suburbs of Cleveland, and then there's a river, and you cross over the bridge, and guess what? Everything changes. Like, what happened?
Buffalo is the same way. East side.
And that is by design. That's part of that realtors, people have made decisions about where we're going to put roads to divide communities. None of that is accidental. So again, when we think about, how did we get so segregated? Some of it happened because of comfort. We went where people like us lived, but make no mistake about it, it was originally by design, okay? As to who lives where. In Erie, again, if you think about it, there was once a thriving Polish community that was replaced with African Americans, because I live in that Polish community. That's where I live. It was deeply connected to Polish tradition. You also have Little Italy, a thriving community where Italians lived, and so on and so forth. How did that happen? Again, some of it, we go where it's comfortable, but people also made decisions who can live where. And at different points in time, your group was probably one of the outgroups. The reason I point to the Constitution and the history is your group did not remain an outgroup for such a long time. Somehow something changed, something worked a little different. Yeah. So, do Black Lives Matter? Yes, they all matter. I gotta say that all lives matter. But there's something really insidious about America's fascination with Black folks. Yeah. I've not read a history where we've treated any other group short of the Native Americans in the same fashion that we've treated folks of dark pigmentation, African descent. So, I know it's a lot. Sorry. Last question, anybody? Last question.
just something real quick.
Yes.
And this is like literally the topic of another talk.
Okay.
But, you know, I never hear anything about the racial history of Gannon.
Who?
The racial history
Okay.
of Gannon as an institution.
Yeah.
And like when did Gannon integrate? Who was the first Black student? Who was the first Black athlete? You know, sort of important milestones like that. You know, where, you know, and we want to know, obviously, you know, some of the good and the bad,
Yeah.
and things like that. But I've never heard anything about that at all.
That's a good research for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a friend who said his father was the first student here, but I can't prove that. Neither can he. So I was going to say it. I don't know if it's true or not.
Right. So does nobody know who the first?
I don't know.
I was trying to find the information. I put some effort into it and realized that it was not easy to find. And I was like, okay, I need to make this a project. So.
Yeah, I you know, the way I would approach that is find old yearbooks. Thank you, and just go back and look at the pictures. The pictures tell the story in of themselves. So.
Talked about it at the Juneteenth event and talked about the fact that just amongst an African American alumni that we probably need to do some surveying of experiences at Gannon just to get a lay of the history, right? The context, like how can you honor where you need to go until you really get a sense of what students have experienced. I have a student who was in Worley Hall with me again, and who said she experienced some of the most severe racism here.
Yeah.
When I was a student, like that wasn't that long ago, and it's like shocking.
Yeah.
And she was my neighbor, and I didn't know, and it's just humbling, like how much we have to learn and unlearn.
And again, with the folks who I'm chatting with, who have been in this fight, and make no mistake, it is a fight. The conflict is just this attitude. Can't give up. Can't give up. It's a struggle, but we didn't get. I mean, in this presentation, it took 400 years to get to this moment where some things are changing. So I tell everyone, please don't think we're going to do something magical and it's going to change. To me, it's like night into day into night into day. You just kind of, it's dark. You don't necessarily experience when it happened. It's just going to happen. And I got to say this because this is where I live, is my faith is, I mean, when I get tired and want to quit and all that, it is my faith that drives me through this. I believe in these moments, I do, that somehow I was put on this planet to make change, not to be frustrated. Something good is going to happen. I just believe that there's a God who I believe in, who's directing where I'm going, and he would not have me in this if I wasn't going to succeed. I've seen some incredible stuff already happening. I am hopeful for the future. And folks like you who are here, I have to tell you, I'm a little disappointed when you talk about BSU that they wouldn't be here, given that I'm talking. But part of that is, what's the relationship? And again, it could be the mass virus at the time of the day. I'm not sure. But, you know, again, I go back to the world of 1974. This room would have been filled with any Black speaker. You know, just hear what you got to say. Let's glean, let's learn, let's do, let's something, you know. It's a different time. So I think that's it. Oh, one more, yes.
Just a point of information, do you realize that there was a problem with the Zoom?
Yes.
Yes.
That it was hacked?
Yeah.
It was
Because I
hacked?
started watching you and then a pornographic video started.
Yes.
And then our administrator shut it off.
Right.
Shut it off.
And they're going to blame that on me, I guarantee you.
We can vouch for the fact you were sitting
Yeah.
with us just chatting.
Yeah.
Somebody needs to hunt that person down.
Let me say one more thing. You're coming, but it just occurred to me. I need to say this also in terms of hope. And I shared this in class. That's what bumped in my head. If you're from Erie, you know about the Jim Cousins event. For those who've been here, the police officer who was showing the video and making fun. Yeah. Okay. So that's when I started training the police. Okay. It was that event that got me there, and it was sensitivity training. And every officer, the first go around, hated me, not me personally, hated what I represented, because they would say things like an African American. No, of course it's going to be an African American trainer. And what are you going to do? It's because of that situation. And what are you going to teach us? It was horrible. It was horrible. They were effing me and MFing me in training. I had to check them. Walt, you would have been proud of me. You would have been proud. You know, I said, you don't have to be here. You don't have to be in this class because you mandated, but I'll put your butt out in the hallway because it's my class, so stop it. Well, it's important that you hear that beginning because it was horrible. But they asked me back. The reason they asked me back is because if you hang in there long enough, those ride-alongs, I started riding with Jim, rode with him 5 times. We became really good friends. And then I rode with another officer and another officer. And in this building, an officer came into my office and said, I want you to bless my ring. I'm about to propose to my fiance. I said, I'm not Catholic. He said, I don't care. I talked to you long enough. I know you believe in what you say. Get the blessing. All right, here we go. Not only did I bless the ring, he said, I want you to stand next to me when I get married. Stand next to me. What an honor. Again, think about where we began and where we ended up. I've officiated 1 wedding, stood in 2. I've just done incredible things with these officers. It didn't start out well, but if you're committed to doing it, my God, again, crazy good things happen if you just hang in there and keep believing it'll work. It works, not all the time, but it does work. Change is possible. So I just want to share that.